In the long and storied history of the Los Angeles Dodgers, there have been press conferences that changed everything. Announcements that rewrote the narrative of a season, that shifted the balance of power in a division, that sent a message to every other organization in baseball that the Dodgers were not finished, that they were never finished, building towards something larger than what anyone outside their walls could fully see. Thursday's press conference was one of those moments. And nobody who was in that room when it ended walked out feeling the same way they had walked in. General Manager Brandon Gomez stepped to the podium at precisely 11 o'clock in the morning, flanked by members of the coaching staff and 2 members of the Dodgers front office whose presence alone signaled that what was about to be announced carried organizational weight far beyond a standard roster move. He did not waste time with preamble. Ben Rortvedt, he announced, had signed a 4-year contract with the Los Angeles Dodgers. Not 1 year. Not 2. 4 years. A commitment of such significant duration that it immediately reframed every assumption the baseball world had made about the nature of Rortvedt's role within this organization. This was not a veteran brought in to stabilize a position during a period of transition. This was not a complementary piece acquired to fill a specific short-term need. This was an investment, a deliberate, long-horizon decision made by an organization that does not commit 4 years to anyone without absolute certainty about what those 4 years are going to produce. The room absorbed this information in the particular silence of people who are recalibrating everything they thought they understood. Then Gomez continued. He spoke about Rortvedt's defensive capabilities, his framing numbers, his arm strength, his ability to manage a pitching staff under the kind of pressure that breaks lesser catchers. He spoke about the character evaluations the organization had conducted, the interviews, the conversations with former teammates and coaches who had worked with Rortvedt across different organizations and different stages of his career. He spoke about the unanimous conclusion those evaluations had produced. And then he said the thing that made every reporter in that room lean forward simultaneously. He said Ben Rortvedt had been signed, in part, specifically to catch Shohei Ohtani. Not as one of his responsibilities. Not as an occasional assignment. As his primary purpose within the organizational structure of this pitching staff going forward. 4 years. Ohtani. The connection was now official, documented, and permanent. The press conference had barely concluded before the second story of the morning broke through the stadium's internal channels and began spreading with the speed that only genuinely unexpected news travels. Rortvedt's first practice session with the Dodgers' 3 starting pitchers had taken place earlier that morning, before the press conference, before the cameras, before the official announcement of the contract that would bind him to this organization for the next 4 years of his professional life. And by every account from everyone who witnessed it, what happened on that practice mound was not the cautious, feeling-out process of a new arrival trying to find his footing in an unfamiliar environment. It was a statement. Rortvedt worked through all 3 starting pitchers with a fluency and a command that surprised even the coaches who had been most enthusiastic about his acquisition. He did not defer unnecessarily. He did not shrink from the authority that a catcher must project if he is going to be trusted by the men throwing to him. He set up, he called pitches with the confidence of someone who had studied these pitchers long before he ever set foot in a Dodgers facility, and he handled everything thrown at him, the velocity, the movement, the occasional wayward pitch that tests a catcher's reflexes and composure simultaneously, with an ease that communicated one thing above everything else. He belonged here. The starting pitchers, none of whom are men who offer approval easily or quickly, exchanged glances after the session that said more than post-practice interviews ever could. Something had clicked. Something that cannot be manufactured by contract language or organizational planning or even the most sophisticated scouting evaluation, the intangible, irreplaceable chemistry between a pitcher and the man behind the plate who receives everything he throws. That chemistry, rare and fragile and absolutely essential, had announced itself on the first day. But the story of that Thursday, the story that would ultimately consume every baseball conversation from Los Angeles to the East Coast by the time the evening programs aired, did not happen at the press conference podium or on the practice mound. It happened in the corridor outside the Dodgers' main facility entrance, at a moment that no one had staged or scheduled or anticipated. Shohei Ohtani was walking through the corridor when Ben Rortvedt appeared at the far end of the hallway. The 2 men had worked together before, in another organization, under different circumstances, in the compressed and intense world of professional baseball where relationships are built quickly and tested constantly. They knew each other. But knowing each other and seeing each other again, in a new context, wearing new colors, carrying the weight of a new shared purpose, that is something different. Ohtani stopped walking. Rortvedt stopped walking. And then, in a moment that no camera was positioned to capture perfectly but that multiple witnesses described in nearly identical terms, Shohei Ohtani crossed the corridor and pulled Ben Rortvedt into a hug. Not the brief, professional embrace of two athletes performing warmth for an audience. A real hug, firm, extended, the kind that communicates something genuine passing between two people who share a history and a respect that the outside world has not yet been fully invited to understand. Those watching from nearby said the moment lasted longer than anyone expected. That the hallway, which is rarely a quiet place during a full practice day, felt briefly suspended, as though the ordinary rhythm of the facility had paused to make room for something that deserved more space than a corridor typically provides. When they separated, Ohtani said something to Rortvedt that no one close enough to hear repeated publicly. But Rortvedt's response was visible to everyone present. He nodded. Slowly, deliberately, with the expression of a man receiving information that matters, not the polite nod of casual conversation, but the nod of someone being told something he needed to hear. What happened next was something that no one in the Dodgers organization had publicly discussed or confirmed prior to that moment. Ohtani designated Ben Rortvedt's uniform number personally. Not through the equipment staff. Not through the front office personnel who typically handle the administrative details of a new player's arrival. Ohtani himself, according to multiple sources inside the facility who confirmed the account independently, made the decision about what number Rortvedt would wear as a Dodger. In the culture of a professional sports team, uniform numbers carry meaning that outsiders sometimes struggle to fully appreciate. They are identity. They are legacy. They are the number that will appear in box scores and record books and highlight packages for as long as a player competes. For one player to designate another player's number, particularly a player of Ohtani's stature designating the number of a newly arrived teammate, is an act that communicates something profound about the nature of the relationship between them. It was a signal. A public one, legible to everyone inside that building who understands the language of professional baseball's unspoken codes. Rortvedt was not simply a new acquisition. He was not a complementary piece or organizational necessity. He was, in Ohtani's personal and visible estimation, something more significant than any of those categories. He was a partner. Chosen. Trusted. Welcomed not by the front office paperwork that makes a signing official, but by the man whose pitches he would catch, the man whose return to the mound was the most watched and most anticipated development in baseball. And then, late Thursday afternoon, the final piece arrived. The piece that made everything else, the contract, the press conference, the practice session, the corridor embrace, the uniform number, suddenly cohere into a single, clear, undeniable picture. Ohtani's return date as a pitcher had been decided. The announcement, delivered through official Dodgers channels with the organization's characteristic economy of language, confirmed what the baseball world had been building toward since the first reports of Ohtani's pitching rehabilitation had emerged. A date. Specific. Confirmed. Immovable. Shohei Ohtani would pitch in a regular season Major League Baseball game. The date had been set. The catcher had been chosen. Signed for 4 years, embraced in a corridor, given a number by the man who would throw to him. The practice sessions were complete. The starting pitchers had felt Rortvedt's presence behind the plate and recognized what it offered. The press conference had made everything official in the way that only public declarations can. Everything that needed to happen had happened. By Thursday evening, the story had overtaken every other conversation in professional sports. Not just baseball, sports. Analysts who cover football and basketball and soccer were discussing it because the story had grown beyond the boundaries of a single sport or a single season. It had become something that people who do not follow baseball, who cannot name a single Dodgers pitcher other than Ohtani, were stopping to pay attention to. Because this was not really a baseball story anymore. It was a story about a man returning to something he had been forced to set aside. About the particular courage required to come back, not from defeat, but from the long, quiet, unglamorous work of recovery. About the difference between a player who is physically capable of performing and a player who is genuinely ready to compete. Ben Rortvedt's 4-year contract says the Dodgers believe Ohtani is ready. The corridor hug says Ohtani believes in the man who will receive his pitches. The uniform number says this partnership is real. And the date, now confirmed, now official, now circled on every calendar in every baseball market in America and across an ocean in Japan, says the waiting is over.